Welcome, Roster Wars, to the United Nations Rookie Summit. Today we are talking about the 2024 Edge Rusher class. My name's Corbin. I'm your host, along with Ross, our other host. No Tyler today. He's taking care of some things at home, but it's just going to be a little twosome today for us. How we doing, Ross?
I'm doing very well. I need to maybe bring a bit more weirdness this week with Tyler not here, so we need to make up for his absence. But yeah, Hall's doing well. Tyler's had a tough week it seems with sickness and other things. So yeah, we've got to make up for that now. Me and you, Corbin.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear his sleepers. I know that Tyler usually gives us quite a bit of varieties, and Ross and I typically are more agreeable with one another, so we're not going to have that yin to our
Yeah,
yang this week, but I think we'll do all right.
we'll see. We'll see. I've got some spicy takes, so hopefully we'll disagree. I like it when we disagree. Gives
Yeah,
us more to talk about.
yep, I do too. But yeah, I mean, again, we've kind of talked about like some of these positions aren't as strong this year. Running backs we mentioned aren't very strong. It's kind of the same with this year's edge class. Now we'll have some first round picks for sure, but there's not those top 10 guys who have really just cemented themselves as one of those blue chip players. There's some prospects that are pretty intriguing that we'll talk about here, but I don't think there's really anybody who's just like a top guaranteed top 5 pick slam dunk like a blue chip edge rusher in this class.
Yeah, there's no Miles Garrett or one of the Bosa's, you know what I mean, who are nailed in number one overall pick, or Will Anderson last year, of course.
Hmm.
But I still do like a few of the guys at the top. Maybe not so much depth this year. I think last year was really good in terms of depth. Um, and so yeah, we'll talk it out. We'll see how it goes. But if we're talking about Will Anderson last year, let's go straight away. I'm the new Tyler, so I'm going to talk about last year's draft and how we had them all shaken out in our rankings. So we talked about five guys last year: Will Anderson, Lucas Van Ness, Tyree Wilson, Nolan Smith, and Miles Murphy. We all had them slightly different. I think we all consensus had Will Anderson at the top. So my rankings were Will Anderson, who had a Defensive Rookie of the Year campaign, 7 sacks, pretty good pick. Miles Murphy, went to the Bengals. He had 300 or so snaps, 3 sacks, not much to write home about. Same with Lucas Van Ness, who I had third. Again, 4 sacks he had this season, a handful of snaps, rotational player. I had Tyree Wilson fourth, who had 493 snaps and 3.5 sacks, but again, didn't really do much to live up to his seventh overall pick. And then I had Nolan Smith fifth, who had 1 sack this year and didn't really do much. Tyler, who's not here, so he can't defend these picks, had Will Anderson one, Miles Murphy two, Tyree Wilson three, Nolan Smith four, and Lucas Van Ness was fifth. And Corbin, I know you've forgotten what you've done, but you had Will Anderson number one, so well done. Tyree Wilson was two, Miles Murphy three, Lucas Van Ness four, and Nolan Smith five. Would you rank them any differently? I know it's not a lot of huge amount of production last year from
Yeah,
these guys.
I mean, Will Anderson, the no brainer number one, so we all nailed that one. But I think the other four guys are still kind of up in the air. I believe Tyree Wilson missed some time with injury. Don't quote me on that. But I know, like, going into the draft, like, he had some kind of nagging injury bothering him. So I'm not sure if he missed any games from that. But yeah, I mean, all those guys are pretty solid prospects. I mean, who was the last guy? Because I know Murphy and Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness, they were all first round. Nolan Smith, he went in the first
E-
round, didn't he? To the
Eagles, yeah,
Ravens, right? Eagles. Oh, okay.
Eagles.
Yep. Well, with the Eagles kind of revamping their defense, I mean, they do have some younger defenders in there. So they had a lot of those veterans leave this year. Maybe he steps up a little bit, but I know that he's a little bit more of that speed rusher type. So maybe a little bit more situational. So I feel pretty confident with how I rank them. But again, I mean, those guys are all kind of in the same bucket for me. They all kind of have like their different style. Tyree Wilson, kind of that long, powerful guy. Murphy, kind of a blend of both. Van Ness has the versatility to bump inside and out. And then you got Nolan Smith, who's pretty much exclusively that speed rusher, outside linebacker type. So in this year's class, I mean, there's not a whole lot of variety at the top end from what I see. I think that we're going to be talking about a lot of guys who win with speed in the top half of this year's draft.
Yeah, in terms of my picks last year, I'd go the same as what I ranked because I don't think we've seen enough. and these guys are all sort of more developmental, and they're not going to pop off in year one. You look at Nolan Smith, like you mentioned, who's just a pure pass rusher. Maybe he gets more time this year. And other guys, again, didn't do enough to make me think, oh, I need to move this guy above this guy. So we'll stick as it is. But some of the sleepers we had, I had KJ Henry, who was a fifth rounder, went to Washington, who actually had a decent season. He played like 300 snaps, but he had 1.5 sacks. Somehow I watched quite a lot of Washington last year, and I was quite impressed with him. I don't think he's going to be a starter for a long time, but he could be a good rotational guy, and I think that's decent from a fifth rounder. Tyler had Will McDonald, who ended up going 15th overall to the Jets. Didn't have much impact this year, but I think this year is last year, but this year is going to be the big one. We lost Bryce Huff, so he's going to slot into that designated pass rusher role. And then Corbin, you had Adetomiwa Adebaware, so the out at Indianapolis in the 4th round, drafted him. And again, didn't have much impact, but he was always a developmental prospect. 1.5 sacks off 132 snaps. I'm sure he'll have more development in the coming years, and I'm sure he'll be a success for you.
Yeah, I forgot about Adebawari. And it's kind of nice to go back and just mention these guys because, like before the draft, I mean, you have your guys, and he was definitely one of those guys. I know that he's kind of like that inside out, versatile kind of chess piece that you can move around the line. So, yeah, I mean, as these guys blossom, they're not going to be impact fantasy starters right away. But I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of these guys, it'll take them a year or two. And, like you mentioned with Bryce Huff leaving the Jets, now Will McDonald can step in and, kind of fill that void. So it's interesting to see year 2 for these guys, how they're going to perform. And you can kind of see a path to success opening up for some of these guys.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be the same with the guys we're talking about as well. And because we're doing it pre-draft, I think Adebawari was getting talked about on the fringes of the first round just because of his combine performance, and he ends up in the 4th. So that is a big factor in obviously playing time they get year one and just how teams see them developmentally as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's kick it off with this year's class. So we're going to be talking about 5 guys between the both of us, and then we'll have our sleeper for you as always. We'll start it off with Laiatu Latu. I think that's how you say it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sounds
Dallas
good. Sounds
Turner.
good.
Laiatu Latu, okay. Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, Chop Robinson, and Darius Robinson. So let's kick it off with our boy Laiatu Latu out of UCLA. He's 23 years old, coming out as a senior, measured in at 6'5", 259 pounds. His RAS score was a 9.19, so pretty elite there. He's got great speed, ran a 4.64 40, and a really good 10-yard split to go with that. And that's something that I really look for in my edge rushers. Like, obviously, the combine warriors don't always pan out, but with that 10-yard split, it kind of shows, how you explode off that line. So he had a good score there. That was good to see. Above average explosive scores, but no agility scores at the combine. So keep an eye on that pro day to see if we get some more numbers there. Last year, he had 49 tackles, 28 solo, 2 forced fumbles, 13 sacks, and 2 interceptions. So seems like a pretty good piece. He's got 2 years of production. In 2022, he had 11 sacks with 12 and a half TFLs. And I really like the versatility out of him because you can bump him into the 3 tech, maybe not best suited for that spot, but he could go all the way out to the wide 9. So yeah, I was pretty impressed with what I'd seen out of Latu because, you hear the hype about Dallas Turner, and he's one guy that I hadn't dug into a whole lot. I guess a lot of the knocks against him are just kind of injury concerns. When he started off in college, he was at Washington, and then he medically retired due to a neck injury. And then after 2020, he came back for UCLA, and he's been very durable since. So I think that he could be the very first edge rusher taken off the board in this year's NFL draft. I wouldn't be shocked if he went top 10. It really seems like a lot of the weaknesses in his game are just stemming from that injury back from a couple of years ago. What are your thoughts on him, Ross?
In terms of NFL draft, it just depends on which teams are willing to risk, or if they see a risk or don't see a risk. They'll obviously have done their own tests on him. They obviously got tested out at the combine, and I think so. When you talk about his story, it was at Washington. He had the injury, and they, like you said, medically retired him. But UCLA said had different doctors and said, no, you're fine. So obviously, if you get a team that's got good doctors saying, no, you're fine, then he could go very high. And I really liked him. I thought he's quite different to what we normally see. We normally see these sort of, like you mentioned earlier, these speed rushers who just are all athleticism and just run as fast as they can. But he's a technician and he wins with his hands. He wins with finesse as opposed to sort of speed or power. And he's so polished. He's got multiple moves and different counters, and he wins right away because he just uses his hands. He just swats 300-pound linemen out the way, and he gets into the backfield straight away. You mentioned his production as well. He's very productive in terms of tackles for loss and sacks. And what I compared him to is he's like a kung fu master. So he just stands there and sort of uses his opponent's body movement against
Yep.
them and just sort of swats them to the side. So he always seems like he's always in control, and that helps him in the run game as well. So I didn't see many question marks, like you said. I think his upright stance sometimes, if he's going inside or if he's fighting double teams, he could get pushed to the ground. But that's just the way he plays. And I think there was people questioning his athleticism as well before the combine, but he seemed to answer those. You mentioned his nine point whatever RAS score. I think that really surprised a few people. And he didn't do the agility drills, but I would say that's the sort of his hallmark is his agility and side to side. So I would have liked to have seen those numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was elite in that respect as well.
Yep. Yeah, the hand usage for me is definitely something that stood out because, I mean, he's really violent with it. You know, he has no problem. And it kind of starts with all of these edge rushers is their get off the line of scrimmage. When the ball's snapped, how fast can they get off the line? That's the first thing that I look at when I'm scouting a defensive tackle or a defensive end or anybody who's going to play up on the line is how fast they react. And I mean, he's got it. And when you have that reaction, it just kind of sets you up for success because, I mean, you are the one who's attacking that offensive lineman. You know, you're not letting them come to you. He's getting into their chest right away. You know, he can win with power, he can win with speed, he can win with finesse. You see the counters when his first move doesn't work. You know, you don't see tight ends blocking him really ever. And even offensive tackles struggle with him, you know. So I think he's a really well-rounded pass rusher, probably the best, most well-rounded pass rusher in this class, which is something that I like to see. And you know, when it comes to fantasy value, I mean, that's going to help him out with tackles for loss. It's going to help him out with sacks. I mean, just being able to get off that line of scrimmage and hit a running back in the backfield, I mean, he's got it down. So, I mean, I liked a lot of what I saw from him. I think he's probably more suited as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 as opposed to a hand in the dirt kind of guy in a 4-3. He's a little bit on the smaller side, so there are some concerns about how he handles the run. I mean, you could see him kind of get swallowed up at times in the run game, but when it comes to his pass rush arsenal, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of question marks. Like we said, the biggest thing for him is how teams kind of check him out with his medical evaluation. That's the one thing that could cause him to slip in the draft, but if he passes that, I mean, he has the pedigree to be that very first edge rusher taken this year. So I liked what I saw it a lot too.
Yeah, and he pops off the screen as well. I remember watching last year. I wasn't even watching him. I was watching other guys in the Pac 12, Pac 10, whatever it is now. And he would just be making plays left, right, and center. I think about Zach Charbonnet as well. Just and it's just absolutely jumping off the screen last year. So I've made a note, right, watch this guy next year. And yeah, it's the exact same. Every game you watch, he's making a massive impact. And obviously that seems to translate well to the next level.
Hmm. Yeah, and you like the 2 years of production too. You know,
Yeah,
obviously he had the medical issues, which kind of hampered him during his time at Washington. So I didn't look into that too much. But I mean, you have 2 years of production that you can look at and be like, okay, this guy was successful, and you can see that translating into the NFL. So he's one of the more interesting guys, you know, because it really comes down to medicals and depending on the landing spot. Like I said, he might be more suited for the 3-4 more than like a 4-3 scheme, but a lot of these teams they might have a 3-4 or 4-3 as their base, but it's kind of like a mixed package. You know, there's different schemes for different situations, but I can see him being on the field for all three downs with his skill set, and you can't say that about a lot of these guys in the class. So, all right. Let's move on here. We got the next one, maybe the hypest pick to go first out of the edge class is Dallas Turner out of Alabama. 21 years old, junior coming out, measured in at 6'3", 247 pounds. Another great athlete, a 9.49 RAS score out of 10. He has elite speed with a 4.46 40 and a really, really nice 10-yard split as well. Elite explosive scores, but no agility for him, same as Latu. Last year, he had 53 tackles, 28 solo, 2 forced fumbles, and 10 sacks. And he actually had 3 years of production. He had 10 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks as a freshman. And then in 2022, he had 8 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. So still pretty consistent, you know. You like to see starting off with a bang for Alabama as a freshman, being able to contribute with all the impressive defensive linemen they have there. So, I mean, I was pretty impressed with Dallas Turner. You know, I think that the hype is there for a reason. But again, kind of just a speed rusher and, you know, not so much power.
I was a bit underwhelmed with Dallas Turner, to be honest, because I didn't watch him that deeply. And you hear obviously he's edge one and he's going to go top 10. And I was like, okay, let's see what he's got. But when I turned on the tape, I don't hate him. I seen a smart player. I don't think he was asked to do a lot in Alabama. I don't think he was asked to do what typical edge prospects do, and it's just right, you line up wide and you're going after the quarterback. And so in that you see his positives. He's disciplined against the run. He's always got eyes in the backfield as well, so he could keep the offensive lineman at arm's length and shed and make the tackle whenever he needs to. And he's got a really high motor to chase down ball carriers. You see him on the opposite side of the field chasing down guys, and that's where you see the sort of closing speed and the athleticism. That's the only time he really gets to show it off as well, I think. Or you can see his agility as well when he's sort of changing directions against mobile quarterbacks as well, I think. So maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but I think he's got the single arm on the inside of the shoulder sort of move. And I didn't really see a lot more. When that doesn't work, I think he doesn't have as many counters as someone like Latu that we mentioned. And I don't think he's maybe as bendy as Latu as well. So yeah, a bit underwhelmed based on the hype, based on going top 10 overall. I still see a smart player, and maybe he wasn't asked to do um, what I like to see, and it is maybe not what he was asked to do pops off the screen as an edge defender. And I'm sure he'll be a better NFL player. I think that all around ability, and obviously just being in the Alabama defense, like you said, since a freshman, it'll help him transition easier to the next level. But I would say I'm not expecting like an explosive sort of sack artist. Like I'm not expecting 8 to 10 sacks in the first couple of years. I'm sure that'll come with time, maybe. But yeah, I'm a bit underwhelmed, I would say, compared to some of these guys.
Yep, I agree with you there. I mean, he's definitely a little bit more raw than I expected. I
Yeah.
mean, the athleticism is clear, you know. He has no problem winning with speed. I mean, he's got a great first step, you know, sudden hands to engage, but you know, he doesn't really have that arsenal of pass rush moves, you know, the counters that we mentioned to help him if he can't win with speed. He doesn't have that elite bull rush like that you see with Latu. I wouldn't say it's elite, but he has that in his bag, you know. You don't see Dallas Turner winning with power. It's pretty much almost exclusively speed. And you know, in college that's fine. You could be very successful, very productive just winning with speed, but in the NFL, you know, you might be kind of relegated to third down pass rush sets. So that will kind of hamper his chances of staying on the field for all 3 downs, which in turn could affect his fantasy value, which is something that we really need to look for when we're evaluating these guys for our purposes. But I mean, the closing speed, it's there. Like he has no problem once he gets past that lineman, getting to the ball carrier, getting to the quarterback. I think that a lot of his weaknesses are very coachable, you know, like the hand usage, teaching, you know, getting to learn some more pass rush moves to help set him up. But I just don't see him really being like a powerful pass rusher and, you know, and being an elite run stopper. I just don't really see that in his game, you know. If he doesn't really have a lot of space to operate, you can kind of tell that he's just not as successful. He might need to be like wide outside of a tight end or outside of a tackle. You know, you don't see him bumping inside and taking on a guard like you could see with Latu. So it's very limited. Like, you know, Latu, like he could play in that 4-3, you know, in certain situations, but I just don't see it with Dallas Turner. You know, he's meant to rush the passer, and that's really it. You know, and so I just wonder if that's going to limit the amount of snaps he's going to take, especially in early on in his career. Now he's still young, he was 21 years old, so he's got time to grow into it. But and in terms of the talent, I mean, he's got great athleticism. There's definitely more to learn. So I could see why he is getting this hype. But, you got to get a safe balance between that high floor, high ceiling kind of guy. So, yeah, I mean, I was impressed by him, but there's definitely some weaknesses in his game that could be coached up, and there's some where you got to realize, he's not going to be that run stuffing defensive end ever in his career.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned his age. He's 21 in February, so like that's super young. So he's going to be have a lot of sort of development still to come. And the things that did like about him are maybe more of the intangible stuff. So maybe play recognition, or sort of when they're doing a read option and he's in the backfield, he's taking the option with the ball. He's not just going, right, my responsibility as the quarterback, I'm going to take the quarterback, which I see quite a lot from the other guys in this class. He does make the play in the backfield the right play, because I think he's a bit of a smart player, and you don't get on the field that early for Alabama if you're not a smart player. So that's I think like you said, these deficiencies can be overcome, they can be taught, and I think he is going to be an easier transition because of that sort of Alabama defense.
Hmm. Yeah, and with him too, you see him drop into coverage as well. I
Yeah,
mean, when when you're evaluating these edge rushers, I mean, that just helps them get on the field. Obviously, you're
yeah.
not going to get any fantasy production from them dropping into coverage. Maybe you get lucky and get an interception like once a season, but for the most part, that helps them stay on the field. So I do like to see that. And really, a lot of these things are what is going to get this guy to be on the field for, 80% of the snaps. Those are the guys I want, not the guys who have like the 50% of snaps. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with you there, Ross. I mean, I was pretty underwhelmed. You hear the hype about him being the best edge rusher in the class, possibly top 10, and there's definitely some deficiencies in his game that you can see pretty clearly on tape after watching him.
Yep.
All right, let's move on here. Player number 3, Jared Verse out of Florida State. 23 years old, junior coming out this year. He measured in at 6'4", 254 pounds. Another great athlete, a 9.52 RAS score out of 10. With elite bench, 31 reps. A lot of these guys don't do the bench, but yeah, it's pretty solid. You just want to be able to see that they can move some weight. Not really, the reps aren't super important, but something to note. Elite speed, a 4.5, 840, and a great 10-yard split as well. Elite explosion and good agility grades, all at the combine. So I think there were a lot of questions about Jared Verse coming in, but he cleared it up pretty well at the combine. I mean, he's clearly an athlete. Last year, he had 41 tackles, 23 solo, one forced fumble, and 9 sacks. And this is a guy who actually has 4 years of college production because he was a transfer from Albany. Within his freshman and sophomore year, he had 21 and a half tackles for loss, 13 and a half sacks just coming out of high school. That's pretty impressive to see. He moves to Florida State, and he had the 9 sacks in 2023, but 2022 he had 16 and a half tackles for loss and 9 sacks. So that's 4 solid years of production, and that's something I like to see out of my edge rushers.
Yeah, and when you watch him, it's just explosion from the snap, and he's got such raw power as well. He's my favorite player in this class. I love watching him. He just makes me say things. I'm sitting watching him in the morning with in a house alone, listening to my music, and he's making me go whoa, because
Mm-hmm.
the things he does to offensive linemen, just with his power that he's got in his hands. And I think he's got a little bit of speed as well. He can attack the outside shoulder, and he does show bend to sort of finish at the quarterback, obviously with that production and the sacks and the tackles for loss. And I did see him use multiple moves, and he had counters. You talk about 4 years of production, you can see that he's a bit more of a polished player as well, which is I wasn't expecting to see. I think he's got absolutely everything. And you mentioned obviously starting at Albany, he was a 0-star recruit, and that makes me want him to succeed more, and it makes me think he can succeed more, because he obviously worked very hard to get where he is now. Not everyone who starts at Albany starts as a 0-star recruit. Even with the athleticism that he's got, they don't always make it to where he is now. And if he came out last year, he probably would have been a top 10 pick as well. And done it this year, just put in another full year of production out there, and for me, he should be, well, we're gonna get to rankings later on, but he should be the top guy selected, top edge, because I think he's got absolutely everything, and that sort of zero-star recruit chip on his shoulder I'm sure he's got, that's gonna be great for him as well in the NFL.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. Honestly, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised with Jared Verse. You see him, falling to, the bottom end of the first round in some of these mock drafts. And when I finally got to
Crazy.
dig in with him, I'm like, what is going on here? Like, this guy is no doubt going before the 20th pick. Like, he might go between like 10 and 20 in there somewhere, but I don't know why, because he's so surprisingly powerful. You think just based on his size, like, yeah, he's not the ideal size, 6'4", 250. You'd think he'd just be a speed rusher, but he's not. He can win with power. He has that great first step, and you see him use those hands to just get into and engage. He judges if it's run pass, and then he just goes. He just knows what to do. He just seems super smart. He really understands leverage. You see him take on these big 300-pound linemen, and he has no problem just shedding that and just getting into the backfield to make a play. I really don't have a whole lot of knocks against him. I mean, you could see like the pass rush skill set, against the run, probably not as good, but I mean, at 250 pounds, I mean, no one's going to be an elite run stopper. But you see the traits and how they can translate to being, an elite pass rusher in the NFL. I mean, he really has it all. I mean, I was impressed with the moves, the bull rush, the speed to power. He can go power to speed. He can switch it up on you. And he has that versatility to play anywhere on the defensive line. Maybe not nose tackle, but he can bump in because he is so powerful. Like, he's not going to be best suited as a 3 tech. But I mean, you see him go and win up against guards too. And it's going to cause these offensive linemen fits. Like, I can see it. I was super impressed with him. Like, him and Latu, I think, are very close, but he's kind of like Latu without the injury history. I didn't see anything pop up for injuries when it came into Verse. I might have to dig into that a little bit deeper, I guess, but nothing serious by any means. So, no, I'm with you. That 4 years of production, like just dominating at Albany, and then he moves on to the ACC, and then he has 2 great years at Florida State. I mean, I don't know why more people aren't talking about Jared Verse, because you could definitely argue he's the top edge rusher in this class. Between him, Dallas Turner, and Latu. I mean, after watching him, I was like, why is Dallas Turner getting all these hype when you see Latu and you see Jared Verse, and they have so many more tools in their bag that they can use to win.
Yeah, I'm the same. I was a bit angry as well. I started looking at other people's scouting reports saying, like, what are the weaknesses? Tell me what is deficient about him to make him not be the clear edge one or edge two there. But I think if you told me one of these guys is going to lead the league in sacks one year, I'd say it's going to be Jared Verse if you had to give me a bet, because I think he's got the potential for that. He's got the all-round game. I really love watching him play. He's got the ability to dominate games and just completely take over. And he did that a few times. I think the Florida game, just unblockable. I think last year I watched the LSU game, and that sticks in my head. He was just literally throwing linemen to the ground just with a shock in his hands. And it's just, there's games where he's completely unblockable, and that's what you want. That's what you want out of your first round edge rusher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I did see a couple of missed tackles in there, but I mean, it happens. I feel like he kind of just gets ahead of his skis sometimes. And, against the run, that's definitely not his strong suit. But, I mean, you could do so much worse. Like, he has the potential to be that 3-down player. Maybe not right out the gates as a rookie, but he absolutely can develop into that. I mean, you can see it. He's 23 years old, so he's not the youngest in the class by any means, but I mean, with that production, I mean, you feel pretty confident that he's going to have an impact immediately as a rookie. So I like Jared Verse a lot. We're on the same page there, Ross. I think we both nailed that one.
That sucks because I thought I was going to be a bit higher. Now you're agreeing with me, and it's boring. No one wants us to agree.
I know. Well, I mean, I knew it was going to be between those 3 guys because, like, when I'm doing these defensive scouting, like I think we were talking about it earlier before we started recording, but I'm looking at a lot of these guys for the Lions, at the back end of the first round. And I see some guys putting Jared Verse, and so I'm like, oh, let me look into him. And after watching, I'm like, there's no fucking way that this guy is going to be there. I might have to settle for a Chop Robinson. And so I've looked into him a lot too. We're about to talk about him here, but I mean, you'll see why these three guys kind of separate themselves from the rest of the pack. I feel pretty confident that you're not going to be as high on Chop or Darius Robinson as you are on these first three guys we've mentioned. So
Yeah.
let's hop
Well, let's
into
talk
it
about it. Let's
here.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk Chop. Chop Robinson, coming out of Penn State. Real name, I wrote it down here. Damian Robinson, nicknamed Pork Chop, came from his size at birth, 11 pounds, shortened to Chop as he got a bit older. Coming out of Penn State, 21 years old, junior coming out. Another super athletic guy, measured in at 6'3", 254 pounds, with a 9.69 RAS score. Again, that's 4 for 4, checking the elite boxes on the RAS. He ran a 4.48 40. He had a great 10-yard split. Elite explosive and agility scores. And last year, not a ton of production for the athleticism. You can see 15 tackles, 12 solo, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 sacks. Also had 7.5 tackles for loss. And then in 2022, he had 5.5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss. So, yeah, like I said, I mean, you see the guy, he's like a freak athlete. You'd think that he would be having these double-digit sacks. I mean, I know the Big Ten is a pretty competitive conference, but, Chop Robinson, he was kind of pegged as one of the top, if not the best edge rusher in this class coming into the year. And, I think it was pretty underwhelming. You didn't really see that production in him. So, I mean, you see the traits 100%, but I think he's kind of in the same bucket as Dallas Turner.
Yeah, I think the athleticism's on show for everyone to see. He's got an explosive first step, and I'd say it's the best in the class just in terms of quickness off the snap. And he wins quickly as well with speed to power when he does win. And he's got good bend sort of to get around the corner as well. And those are the kind of things that give you a high ceiling because not everyone has it, and it's sort of like God gifted effectively. Feels like all these Penn State guys do have that, but in terms of the NFL, it's that athleticism that I can see why he's been talked about in the first round. But I see he's just very raw, isn't he? He's just very raw as a pass rusher. He's got a limited number of moves. It's just with speed and speed to power. He doesn't have the hand technique to sort of win in different ways. He finds it difficult with a second effort. So once he's locked up, he's like pretty much out the play, and his run defense is like non-existent as well. Like he's only going to be a pass rush specialist at best right now in the NFL, and his success is going to be wholly dependent on his development and how he can develop into more. And it's not totally out the window. You see guys like Brian Burns, I think, who's probably a bit better coming out of college,
Mm-hmm.
but in the same way, he's developed into sort of an all-round player. Um, but just thinking of it in terms of fantasy purposes, like you need those tackles to sort of supplement the big plays. So even if you get 8 to 10 sacks, it doesn't make you a top 10 edge rusher. You need those tackles. And I just don't see Chop Robinson getting on the field enough to do that. So even as a fantasy guy, I'm not entirely sure he's going to be that relevant for a few years unless he can develop more. I think he's really the definition of a sort of boom bust prospect.
Yep. Yep, I'm with you on that one as well. Yeah, I wish we could disagree, but I mean, the one thing I will kind of push back on is, he doesn't have like a ton of tricks. Like, I do think he has a bunch of pass rush moves. Like, he's
Right.
super twitchy and, like he is very creative in how he decides to go after the quarterback, with the exception of power. He doesn't have any power moves whatsoever. It's all speed moves. But I mean, you see him juking guys out and stuff, and I mean, he's
Yeah.
rushing, he putting the hurry on the quarterbacks, no problem. Like, I mean, he gets it done. You mentioned the great first step. I mean, it's pretty clear with his athletic scores that he can get after a guy with speed, but I mean, you just don't see the power, and he's about the same size as Jared Verse. Almost a
Yeah.
yeah, 6'3". Yeah, so he's an inch smaller. So he's the exact same size as Jared Verse, and you just see Verse have so much more power in his game than Chop Robinson. So, I mean, he's got to work on the hand usage for sure. I mean, the power, I don't know if it's ever really going to develop, but he is only 21 years old. So, I mean, it, there's just times where you see him kind of just get swallowed up completely by an offensive lineman, and just totally erased from the play. And like you mentioned, really just kind of like a third down pass rusher. Maybe one day he could develop into that 3 down kind of guy, but I don't see it anytime soon, maybe for like 3 years or so. And We'll see where he goes in the NFL draft because that usually gives you a pretty decent indication of how a team will use him. But I think he's kind of like high second round at this point. Like I don't even know if he makes the cut in the first round of the NFL draft.
Yeah, if he gets in the late first, it'll be sort of as a luxury pick. So we've seen Nolan Smith with the Eagles. It's a similar type of scenario where you're betting on the athleticism, you're betting on him to get on the field early just as a pass rusher, and you're okay with that. And you're not expecting production straight away. So if that's how he gets in the end of the first round, I can see it to one of these teams who are maybe a bit more well-rounded. But you're right. Personally, it wouldn't be me, because I want my in terms of NFL and in terms of fantasy, maybe more of the all-round game.
Yep. Yeah, and I see a lot of mock drafts having him go to the Lions, and I just don't see it happening because he just doesn't really fit that archetype of what
Yep.
they're looking for. Like a lot of people say, like, oh, well, James Houston went down and our pass rush was so terrible. Yeah, we got James Houston in the 5th round, and we really only use him on third down sets. I don't think we're going to use a late first round pick on a guy who's only going to be on the play, 3, 4 times for every possession. So yeah, for a guy who was super hyped coming into this year, he was very underwhelming. He has a chance to be successful, but I think it's going to be in a limited capacity. He definitely will serve his role in the NFL. They need players like that, but when it comes to fantasy production, I just don't see it. The tackles aren't going to be there, even if he has the 10 sacks, like you said. He's just not going to be super consistent. He might get you 20 points one week and 0 the next. So I wouldn't trust him. I mean, maybe like as a 7th round kind of guy that you stash on the taxi, see if he develops after a year or two. But other than that, I think you can kind of look past Chop Robinson. All right. Let's move on to our last guy of the day. It's Darius Robinson, another Robinson, coming out of Missouri. He's a 22-year-old senior, measured in at 6'5", 285 pounds. Finally, we get a big boy in the mix. He had a 8.82 RAS score as a defensive tackle, but as a defensive end, a 6.26. He is a little bit of a tweener at those two positions. He started off most of his college career as a defensive tackle, but his senior year, he was mostly used as an edge rusher. So still pretty good combine scores. For a defensive tackle, elite at 4.95. We see a lot of these other guys in the 4.5s at edge. So, definitely not the fastest, but he has a good 10-yard split, elite explosive scores, and no agility. And honestly, the explosive scores, the 10-yard split, that's really what you want to look for in these guys. It's how fast they can get off the line and their short area quickness. It would have been nice to see the agility skill or the agility testing scores for Darius, but alas, we'll have to wait for the pro day. Last year, he had 43 tackles, 29 solo, a forced fumble, 9 sacks, and 14 tackles for loss. So, yeah, definitely a different kind of edge rusher for us to talk about. These last 4 guys have been, predominantly speed rushers. So you got a guy who's a little bit in between that defensive tackle edge rusher role. So we really have a guy who profiles more as that 4-3 defensive end and can bump inside of the 3 tech in a pinch. So I like Darius Robinson, but just not sure on how it's going to, how it will work out for fantasy.
Yeah, you can definitely see the drop off from the top 3 guys. He's definitely more of a a developmental guy as well. Not to say that he can't do anything right now, but he's only got 1 year at edge, so he was a defensive tackle sort of full time. He had before last year he had 8 snaps outside the tackle, and then as he moved to edge this year, he had over almost 400 snaps outside the tackle. So it was a full time position change. And you mentioned his production, 9 sacks, pretty good for your first year as an edge defender. And you can see how he's sort of still a bit raw as a pass rusher. He tries to win with power a lot of the time, and his physicality, and that's great. He does win quite a lot. He's got a really great push pull sort of move, and again throwing linemen to the ground. It's always great to see when you're watching these guys. But I think he's not as polished, and he'll need to work on that. And I'm fine with that because it's just his first sort of year in the position, and you can see I'm sure he's going to develop more. I think he came into a lot of people's consciousness at the Senior Bowl, and he was getting a lot of rave reviews. And a guy like that sort of seems made, especially the one-on-one drills that they do as well. He just got a lot of pop, and you can see that as well. And I think teams are going to covet the versatility. So, like you said, for fantasy purposes, he's going to get a lot more tackles. And a guy like Chop Robinson, he might be able to play more downs early on because he's got the versatility to play inside, whether that's inside on early downs or more likely inside on late downs and let the sort of speed rushers come in. I think he's going to be on the field for more snaps, and that's positive for fantasy purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the athletic testing didn't wasn't amazing, and that's usually when you see these raw guys, you want the raw athleticism. But for me, I think he's got enough the strength and the power there to for there be something to work with.
Hmm. I just think that, half of the teams aren't really going to consider him just because, he has to be in the correct scheme, mostly in a
Yeah,
4-3 because he is like that prototype, hand in the dirt kind of guy. You see the physicality at the Senior Bowl, you see it on tape. I mean, that's how he wins. He doesn't have a huge toolbox like some of these other guys. He doesn't have those speed moves. He needs that bull rush, so his pass rush can be pretty predictable. Now, he has had success with it, but you wonder, like in the NFL with the bigger, more skilled tackles, how that's going to translate. And, he'll probably be bumping in and taking on some guards too. So you wonder how that's going to, translate from college to the NFL. But at the same time, I think he's a guy who's going to see a lot of playing time, like he has a high motor, very, very physical. He dominates tackles in the run game and the pass game, but I just don't think it's going to translate to fantasy, unfortunately. Like, I love the player. Like, he's a great player. I just think that he's going to set everybody else on his team up for success.
right.
He's going to be on pass rush sets. He's going to drive that tackle back, maybe have the quarterback step up in the pocket, and then maybe a blitzer comes through with a sack. Or maybe the speedier edge rusher has an extra second to get to the quarterback. And, same with like holding that edge. Like, he'll set that edge, no problem. Running back cuts back, linebacker cleans up the tackle. That's kind of how I see his game, which is great for an NFL team. Like, you need guys to set that edge to push that pocket, but we're not going to see that in our fantasy scores on a weekly basis. So I don't think he'll be like that 10 sack a season kind of guy. Like, he could get there. He's not going to lead the NFL in sacks by any means ever. It's pretty safe to say that. But yeah, I love the player. I just don't think that he's really a guy that's going to make an impact for your fantasy team. That's all.
Yeah, I see that, and I think my comparison for him would be John Franklin Myers. He's maybe a bit more of a deep cut, but he's a Jets player who he was a late round pick and he broke out, but he's an edge guy who bumps inside on later downs because he's got that physicality. And like you said, he's not as good a fantasy producer as a real NFL player. So that sort of hit with me a little bit. I like that sort of projection for him. I think that's right. And it also depends on what NFL teams see him as well. We're thinking he's an edge prospect because that's what's been talked about, and obviously he played there last year. But NFL teams might say, look, we see you as a sort of full-time defensive tackle. Is it a five technique or something like that? So
Hmm.
it depends. His usage depends the plan that the NFL teams have for him. And if he's being drafted in sort of the late first, early second, like has been projected, I'm sure teams will have a sort of plan for him. And I'm sure we'll see it pretty early on. So, yeah, you're right. You've convinced me. Maybe not as productive fantasy wise, even though he may be on the field for a lot of snaps.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. Like, you could see the 3 down potential, like on the first, second down run downs, like he's on the outside, kicks in for the pass rush on 3rd down. I think that he is a piece that you can move around, which is what I like to see. But, at the same time, I have to wear my NFL draft hat and I have to wear my fantasy draft hat. And I love him as an NFL draft prospect, but for fantasy, I just don't see it really adding up. So. All right, we got through all 5. Ross, let's hear your rankings. I think we're probably going to be pretty similar, maybe spot on. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so I'm going verse, I love verse. So he's going top. Then I'll have Latu and then Dallas Turner. And then I'm going to go Robinson before Darius Robinson before Chop Robinson. Just what I mentioned, maybe being on the field a lot more. Chop has not got the game that translates to fantasy. He's just a sack artist and
Hmm.
quite a developmental one at that. So
Well, believe it or not, we have the exact same rankings once again. I went back and
Shocking.
forth between Verse and Latu, but when it comes down to it, like it really is going to depend on landing spot and, the neck injury. It's a scary thing, medically retiring. I didn't dig into it in depth a lot, but Latu has been pretty durable. So on the other hand, I think they're very, very close. Both can win with speed and power, which is what I really sets them apart from these other guys. It's really just speed or power. With Dallas Turner, I have him coming in at third. Pretty much speed guy. Darius Robinson, power only. Chop Robinson, speed only. So having that versatility and that arsenal to not only against the pass but when they're running the ball too. I mean, they can win on so many different ways, and I could see them being the three down players. So I like both of those guys a lot. Dallas Turner, I mean, he definitely could be the best in the class, but it's going to take a little bit. I think that you'll see Jared Verse and Latu making a more immediate impact on your fantasy team as opposed to Dallas Turner. Even if Dallas Turner goes, he's the first edge rusher off the class. I mean, I'm sticking with it. I mean, the tape don't lie. He's just a little bit more of a one-trick pony than the other guys.
Yeah, I feel the same. We obviously had the same rankings, but I feel you with Dallas Turner as well. So I thought that was going to be my spicy take, but maybe not so much.
No, I mean, it was pretty close. I mean, I went back and forth. I mean, Latu, I think that you can make an argument that he would be number one. Why did you really put Verse over Latu? Because I think they're kind of similar.
I think Versus got more power, and I just think he embarrassed people more. Like it was literally just me watching him, having a lot more fun watching him play. I think Latu doesn't have as much athleticism, although he does probably have a good baseline, and his agility is maybe a bit better. I just think the raw sort of explosion, I think Verse was a little bit better than Latu. And to me, it's not as close as you, so I would have it a clear 1, 2, 3. I just see Verse as like otherworldly.
Yeah. I go Verse and Latu, top tier. Then we got tier two. You got Dallas Turner. And then you got, the Robinsons, Darius Robinson, Chop Robinson, and a couple other guys who are right up there too. But I don't know. My sleeper, honestly, I might have him at number 4 overall in this entire
Okay.
class. I got to dig into a couple more guys. I haven't gotten into it super deep yet. But let's kick it off with the sleepers here, Ross. You got a spicy one for us, I hear.
It's not spicy. It's late, so it's not as spicy. I don't think he's going to be a high draft pick, and I don't think he's going to be a productive fantasy player. But I really
Deep
like him. I
sleeper,
think he
then.
could. Yeah, it's a deep sleeper. That's the word. So it's a Mohamed Kamara out of Colorado State. So he's a three-star recruit out of high school, but he's been very productive the last 3 years. He's like a full-time player over the last 3 years. And his 2023 season, he had 56 tackles, 13 sacks, 17 tackles for loss. He was named the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year as well. But his game is a he's he's a pass rusher, but he could play all three downs. So like his calling card, I would say, is he's sort of good closing speed and sort of bend around the edge. He's got a really high motor though, and I don't think he's a liability in the run game. Is what I'll say. He can shed blockers and make tackles. He's got a smaller frame. He's 6'1", 248 pounds, and his RAS score was like in the 8.5, something like that. But I think that's just because he's height weight. I think his 40 was pretty good, and his 10-yard split was like really good as well. And obviously that just shows off his sort of explosiveness off the snap. So I think he could be a contributor in the NFL. He's maybe going to be a fourth round, fifth round pick, something like that. Has been currently projected, but I really liked him. I watched a lot of guys between the first and fifth round, and this is a guy sort of who stood out to me as maybe being able to impress me and do a little bit better than his draft grade.
Hmm. I've got to look into him a little because I have not heard of Muhammad Kamara, and that's why I appreciate these deep sleepers because you've got some guys that could definitely be paying dividends. Maybe not first year, second year, but a guy to stash on the taxi squad. And I mean, when you're talking about like a late first round pick in the NFL draft, a lot of these guys in the roster wars draft, they're going to be going sixth, seventh round. Like they're all taxi squad stashes at this point, and maybe they can pan out to something. So I really just look for traits when I'm looking at some of
Yep.
these guys that I can grab. And anybody can get like a Will Anderson or something like that in like the second, third round of a roster wars draft. But you can find a lot of value in that sixth, seventh round, and some of these guys might not even be drafted, and you could pick them right up off the waiver wire. So I don't like to spend those high picks unless I'm really impressed with the player. And this guy, I mean, I could see myself using a draft pick later on him. My sleeper this year is going to be Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. He's 22 years old, junior coming out, measured in at 6'3", 267 pounds, so pretty good size. 9.23 RAS score as a defensive end and a 9.55 as a defensive tackle. Good speed, a 4.7 540, great 10-yard split, and elite explosion and agility, which are the things that I focus on when it comes to edge rushers. Last year, he had 57 tackles, 29 solo, 2 forced fumbles, and 5 sacks. And I've already kind of preached about my affinity for the Senior Bowl because you get all these superstars out of college, and they all get brought down to Mobile, Alabama. You might have the same helmet on just for your school, but all bets are off. They're out of their comfort zone, and they're just thrown in to a pit with a bunch of these guys who are trying to prove themselves. And there's always guys who are standing out at the Senior Bowl. Some guys that were never on anyone's radar that make a name out of themselves at the Senior Bowl. And that's exactly what Marshawn Kneeland did. I mean, he just looked like a man amongst boys out there. Tylese Fuaga out of Oregon State, he's probably going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He beat his ass on a couple of reps. And you saw that last year, like Darnell Wright, like the offensive tackle out of Tennessee. Like, he really made a name for himself. And I think he went maybe 9 to the Bears. Maybe I was off a spot or 2 on that. But he really kind of impressed just because he was beating the hell out of Will Anderson, So, I mean, when you see some of these top tier elite college talents and you match them up on these one-on-one drills, I think you really get to see what these guys are made out of. And Nealon kind of reminds me of Aiden Hutchinson. And it's funny because I watched an interview with him and he asked like who he's compared to, and he said Aiden Hutchinson. I don't know if that's kind of like the Michigan narrative, but I did think like he is really impressive. He's very versatile. He can go inside, he can go out, 3-4, 4-3, standing up, hand in the dirt. I mean, that just speaks playing time to me. And, he's a guy who wasn't on anyone's radar. And now we're talking, like probably a second round pick, almost certainly. He can win with speed and power. He's got a great first step and a powerful punch. He can win with speed. He can win with the power. He's got a high motor. He doesn't give up on plays. He just really seems like a Dan Campbell kind of guy to me, a guy who's like gritty, just doesn't give up, just gives it their all every single play. He's got a great bull rush. He does have some moves, but pass rush moves definitely need some work, but I think that a lot of his weaknesses are coachable, and like there's like if his first move doesn't work, he can be a little bit susceptible, getting kind of washed out on plays. Obviously, with Western Michigan, you don't have the best talent in the MAC, but there's some good players there. So, I mean, you could see the transition to the NFL maybe being a little bit bumpy, but I think that he's got a lot of traits that I look for. And, for a guy who's going to go second, third round, almost certainly third round, that's really all you're looking for is somebody who can be coached up and develop into a 3-down starter. And I think he has the athletic profile and kind of the tools right now to step in and make an immediate impact as a rookie.
Yeah, I liked him as well. I wanted to go a bit deeper, but he was definitely a consideration for me. And like I said, he is getting a bit more buzz since Senior Bowl, sort of similar to the Darius Robinson trajectory. And that this is when you find out about those guys, and you're like, wow, this guy's good. Let's look into him a bit more. And I like that you mentioned the Senior Bowl because I think last year Byron Young, who was a standout for the Rams, who's a later round pick, but turned out to be really good for fantasy. He was sort of seen at the Senior Bowl and doing well there. So it definitely does project well, I think, when you're compared against your peers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marshawn Kneeland's definitely a guy that gets me pretty excited, because you see every year you have some guy who is just not on anyone's radar, and then all of a sudden they're in the first round conversation. So he's definitely a guy that I've been following pretty closely ever since the Senior Bowl. All right, that's going to do it for this week, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Next week, what do we got for you here? Let me check. Ooh, we're going into the tight end class, back to offense. So that's going to be another exciting one here. couple of good pieces. I know we talked about it on the International Football Bros podcast, but there's two guys in particular that stand out, and seems like we got a pretty mixed bag with Brock Bowers, the surefire first round tight end out of Georgia.
Yeah, he's been mocked a lot to the Jets, so I'm doing my homework. I'll have lots of takes next week, I'm sure.
Okay, good, awesome. All right, guys. Well, we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in again. Take care.
Thanks very much. See ya.